What if one morning you woke up and the United States wasn't so united? Imagine waking up to a country where states have gone their own way and new nations are forming where familiar road trips used to be. It might sound crazy, but history has shown that even the strongest countries can break apart under the right conditions. Political fights, economic struggles, and cultural differences have already created deep divisions, and some states are in a better position than others to go independent. Today, we're counting down 10 states that could realistically break away from the US in the future, so don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss more content like this. 10. Texas. Texas has always had a strong independent spirit. It was its own country for nearly a decade before joining the United States in 1845. Even today, many Texans take pride in the idea that their state could stand on its own. It has the second largest economy in the country, with industries like oil, technology, and agriculture keeping it strong. With a population of over 30 million, it's bigger than some countries. Texas also has its own power grid, separate from the rest of the US, which adds to the idea that it could function independently. Politically, Texas often clashes with the federal government, especially on issues like gun rights, immigration, and energy policies. The state has a long history of pushing back against Washington, and there have even been calls for secession in the past. Culturally, Texas has a unique identity, from cowboy traditions to a deep love of barbecue and country music. Its massive size, diverse geography, and booming cities like Houston, Dallas, and Austin make it feel like a country within a country. The idea of leaving keeps coming up, and the state's strong economy and independent mindset make it one of the most likely to try. If there was ever a serious push for secession, Texas would probably be one of the few states with the resources and willpower to actually pull it off. 9. California. California is the most populous state in the US, home to nearly 40 million people. If it were a country, it would have the fifth largest economy in the world, bigger than the United Kingdom. The state is known for Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and some of the most valuable real estate in the world. It has a strong cultural and economic identity that sets it apart from the rest of the country. Politically, California often moves in the opposite direction of the federal government, especially on environmental laws, immigration, and healthcare. It has passed its own strict policies on climate change and clean energy, sometimes clashing with Washington over regulations. Many Californians feel their state pays more in federal taxes than it gets back, fueling frustration. The state's large immigrant population and ties to the global economy also make it feel more connected to the world than to some other U.S. states. California has seen secession movements in the past, which gained attention after the 2016 election. Though it's unlikely to happen, California has the size, economy, and resources to function as its own country. If political divisions in the U.S. keep growing, California is one of the few states that could realistically go its own way and survive. 8. Hawaii. Hawaii is already different from the rest of the U.S. It's the only state made up entirely of islands, sitting in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It wasn't even part of the country until 1959, and before that, it was an independent kingdom with its own monarchy. Many native Hawaiians still feel that their land was taken from them when the U.S. overthrew the Hawaiian government in 1893. There's a strong independence movement in the state, with some people arguing that Hawaii should return to being its own nation. Hawaii's location makes it more connected to Asia and the Pacific than to the mainland U.S. It has a unique culture, blending Polynesian, Japanese, Filipino, and American influences. The economy is built on tourism, the military, and agriculture, and while it relies on imports for many goods, it has enough resources to support itself if it ever became independent. The U.S. military has a major presence in Hawaii, which could make breaking away complicated, but it also means Hawaii is strategically important. If tensions between the U.S. and other countries grow, Hawaii could find itself looking for a different path. While it's still a distant possibility, Hawaii's history, culture, and location make it one of the most likely states to break away if the U.S. ever started to split apart. 7. Alaska. Alaska is massive and remote, with a land area bigger than Texas, California, and Montana combined. It was originally part of Russia before the U.S. bought it in 1867, and there are still some Alaskans who think it should have stayed independent. The state is rich in natural resources, especially oil, gas, and minerals, which keep its economy strong. With only about 730,000 people spread across such a huge area, Alaska has always had an independent streak. Life there is tough, with extreme weather and long winters, and people take pride in being self-sufficient. The state is physically cut off from the rest of the U.S., bordered by Canada to the east and surrounded by ocean on the other sides. This separation adds to the feeling that it's its own place, not just another U.S. state. Politically, Alaska often leans conservative. Many Alaskans don't like government interference and prefer local control over their land and resources. Some groups, like the Alaskan Independence Party, have even pushed for secession, though they haven't gained much traction. If the U.S. ever faced serious internal problems, Alaska could be one of the first states to consider going its own way. With its resources, small population, and geographic isolation, it's one of the few places that might actually be able to survive as an independent nation. 6. Florida. Florida is one of the most unique states in the U.S., both in geography and culture. It's surrounded by water on three sides, with a climate that feels more Caribbean than American. The state is home to a massive population of nearly 22 million people, and it has some of the biggest tourist attractions in the world, like Disney World and Miami Beach. Florida also has a huge economy, powered by tourism, agriculture, and international trade. It has strong ties to Latin America, especially Cuba, Venezuela, and Puerto Rico, which sometimes makes it feel more connected to the Caribbean than to the rest of the U.S. politically. Florida is unpredictable. It has swung between both major parties in elections and often feels like its own battleground, separate from the rest of the country. Some parts of Florida, like Miami, have a strong international presence, while others, like the Panhandle, feel more like the Deep South. Florida deals with serious issues like hurricanes, rising sea levels, and insurance crises, which could push it to seek more control over its own affairs. While secession isn't a major movement in Florida right now, the state's unique geography, diverse culture, and economic strength make it one of the places that could break away if the U.S. ever started to divide. 5. Washington. Washington sits in the Pacific Northwest, far from the political centers of the U.S. It has one of the strongest economies in the country, with tech giants like Microsoft and Amazon calling it home. The state also benefits from international trade, especially with Asia, thanks to its major port in Seattle. Politically, Washington leans progressive, often clashing with federal policies on issues like climate change, healthcare, and gun control. It has passed its own strict environmental laws and even explored ways to create a state-run healthcare system. Many people in Washington feel culturally and economically separate from much of the rest of the U.S. The state also shares a border with Canada, and some Washingtonians feel they have more in common with Vancouver than with cities in the Midwest or South. Natural resources, from hydroelectric power to agriculture, make the state largely self-sufficient. There's even been talk of a larger movement for the Pacific Northwest, including Oregon and parts of California, to form an independent region. While secession isn't a serious movement right now, Washington has the economy, geography, and political differences that could make it one of the first states to consider breaking away if national divisions continue to grow. 4. Montana. Montana is one of the least populated states in the U.S., with just over 1 million people spread across vast open land. It has a rugged, self-reliant culture, shaped by farming, ranching, and outdoor life. The state's geography includes mountains, forests, and wide plains, making it feel physically distant from much of the country. Politically, Montana is fiercely independent, with many residents valuing personal freedoms and limited government. The state has a history of pushing back against federal land policies, as much of its land is owned by the U.S. government. Many Montanans believe they should have more control over their natural resources, especially timber, minerals, and water. Though Montana has a small economy compared to larger states, it has enough resources to sustain itself if it ever needed to. The state's strong gun culture and survivalist mindset also contribute to the idea that Montana could stand on its own. In recent years, more people have moved to Montana from places like California and Texas, drawn by the open space and lower cost of living. Its combination of independence, natural wealth, and geographic isolation make it one of the states that could potentially break away if the country ever started to fracture. 3. Oregon. Oregon is known for its progressive cities, especially Portland, but the state has deep political divides. While the western part of Oregon leans liberal, the eastern half is far more conservative, leading to tension within the state itself. Some rural counties have even tried to leave Oregon and join neighboring Idaho, a movement known as Greater Idaho. This divide shows that Oregon already has internal struggles that could make it easier for it to split off entirely. The state has a strong economy, driven by tech, agriculture, and international trade. It's also one of the most environmentally conscious states, often passing laws that go further than federal regulations. Oregon's coastline, forests, and rivers give it valuable natural resources, making it less dependent on the rest of the U.S. for survival. The state also has a history of independent political movements, including protests against federal land policies and law enforcement. Some Oregonians feel that the federal government doesn't represent their interests, whether they're on the left or right. If the U.S. were to break apart, Oregon could be one of the first to go, possibly forming an alliance with Washington and California to create a new Pacific nation. 2. South Carolina. South Carolina has a long history of independence. It's the first state that seceded from the Union before the Civil War. While that was a different time, the independent spirit remains strong. The state has a deeply rooted culture, with strong ties to Southern traditions, religion, and military service. It's home to key military bases, and many residents have a strong sense of patriotism, though not always toward the federal government. Politically, South Carolina is conservative and often at odds with national policies coming from Washington, D.C. Issues like gun rights, taxes, and government regulations are common sources of frustration. Economically, South Carolina has been growing, with industries like manufacturing, tourism, and agriculture keeping it strong. The state also has an important port in Charleston, which gives it access to global trade. Some South Carolinians believe that their state could operate better with more autonomy, though there isn't a serious push for secession at the moment. However, if political divisions in the U.S. deepen, South Carolina's strong identity, economic growth, and history of independence could make it one of the states most likely to consider breaking away. 1. New York. New York is often seen as the financial and cultural capital of the U.S. With Wall Street, Broadway, and one of the busiest ports in the world, the state is an economic powerhouse. If New York were a country, its economy would rank among the top in the world. The state's influence extends far beyond its borders, shaping everything from media to global finance. However, many New Yorkers feel disconnected from the rest of the country. The city itself has more in common with London or Tokyo than with rural parts of America. Politically, New York is one of the most liberal states, often opposing federal policies on immigration, social issues, and climate change. The state also contributes far more in federal taxes than it receives back, leading to frustration among its residents. Culturally, New York is diverse, with people from all over the world calling it home. It operates as a global city, making it feel separate from national politics at times. While the idea of New York seceding isn't widely discussed, its economic strength, global influence, and political differences make it one of the states that could realistically consider breaking away if the U.S. ever faced a major crisis.